Kenshi is a world shrouded in mystery, a land where ancient ruins whisper forgotten truths and history is written in blood and rust. Over the years, I've made dozens of videos dissecting its deepest secrets, crafting theories and connecting the dots between fragments of lore. But today, I wanted to do something that I honestly probably should have done a long time ago. I'm not going to do another speculative deep dive. This one has no wild guesses, no unsolved riddles, just facts. This is a definitive timeline of everything that we know that happened in this brutal and frankly beautiful world. From the godlike technologies of the First Empire to the rise and fall of Catalan's Second Empire, to the wars and betrayals that shaped the modern factions of Kenshi. We're going to be covering it all. So think of this as the ultimate lore foundation. A resource for newcomers and veterans alike to understand Kenshi's past before we dive back into theorizing what it all could mean. So whether you're just discovering Kenshi's lore or you've been following my channel for years now, strap in, because this is the true history of Kenshi, and as close to canon as we can get. The earliest recorded civilization on Kenshi, known only as the First Empire, remains shrouded in mystery to this very day. The hyper-advanced society would wield technologies that were well beyond modern comprehension, with evidence suggesting they possess gargantuan automated industrial complexes, orbital satellites, colossal mechanized constructs, and even space elevators. All things that are indicative of a civilization that has mastered both terrestrial and extraterrestrial engineering. Archaeological remnants such as corroded metallic superstructures found across the face of Kenshi further hint at their technological prowess. But whether they originated on Kenshi or arrived from beyond the stars remains unknown. What is certain, however, is that their dominance was absolute, until it was shattered by forces that they could not fully control. You see, at the height of their power, the First Empire engaged in a devastating war against an unknown adversary. The conflict was waged with weapons of such destructive magnitude that their very use became a source of existential dread. Among these weapons were the behemoths, titanic skeletal war machines that dwarfed all other life forms. And these colossal constructs, built for annihilation, may have been too powerful even for their creators. For fearing the consequences of their own creation, the ancients enacted a ruthless solution. Exploiting the behemoth's unwavering loyalty, they commanded them to descend into a vast subterranean pit, only to seal them within an impenetrable metallic tomb. And this act, now known as obedience, stands as one of the most chilling betrayals in Kenshi's history. Further evidence also suggests either a possible mass directive for the smaller skeletal units to self-terminate, or a deliberate opting to take their own lives for reasons unknown, as numerous skeleton remains have been discovered with clear signs of voluntary deactivation or destruction. Whether this was a separate event or directly linked to obedience remains speculative to this day, but the implications are grim. A civilization willing to eradicate its own enforcers just to maintain control. What followed was an era of unparalleled devastation. The Chaos Age was marked with a cascade of apocalyptic events, and according to some fragmented records, a violent uprising of the surviving skeletons, possibly even in retribution for obedience, as well as celestial disturbances, cataclysmic natural disasters, and rampant plagues. The exact sequence of events here remains lost to time, but the outcome was undeniable. The First Empire would collapse, and humanity would be pushed to the edge of extinction. During this time, ancient myths would also speak of a figure named Kytron, a being credited with halting calamities during the Chaos Age. However, with no verifiable records, Kytron's existence and role remains a subject of debate among lore masters of Kenshi even now. What is certain is that the world emerged from the Chaos Age a fractured shadow of what it once was, setting the stage for the brutal, unforgiving era that would immediately follow. Emerging from the ashes of the Chaos Age, the Second Empire arose as an attempt at redemption. Led by the enigmatic skeleton ruler Catalan and his followers, This new regime sought to rebuild civilization while studying and salvaging the remnants of the lost first. Their motive, at least initially, appeared noble: atonement for the sins of their kind during the skeleton uprising of the past. Yet humanity, fractured and regressed, had long forgotten the ancient betrayals, leaving the skeletons to govern over a world that no longer understood its own history. It was also during this era that the northwestern regions of the continent descended into barbarism, with human tribes devolving into cannibalistic savagery for reasons still unknown. The Second Empire, striving to maintain order, would divert significant resources to combat this threat. And among these resources were their most formidable instruments of control, the Hydraulic Knights, an elite militant force tasked with eradicating external threats such as pirates, raiders, and most notoriously, the flesh-eating tribes of the north. And while ultimately the efforts to eradicate these tribes was unsuccessful, the Hydraulic Knights' efforts must have been significant, as even in modern cannibal folklore they speak of a relentless skeleton warrior known as the Inedible One, a figure believed to have been either a high-ranking Hydraulic Knight or even the legendary commander of the Knights, General Zhang. The Knights themselves would go on to become a symbol of the Empire's iron-fisted enforcement, a reminder that even in decay, the Empire's will was absolute. But what began as a benevolent reconstruction effort would soon morph into an oppressive rule. The Empire, once a beacon of order, grew increasingly authoritarian. Child prisons were established, brutal crackdowns targeting alleged pirates and religious dissidents, and countless innocents would perish under the weight of imperial paranoia. As dissent simmered, a catastrophic famine would also strike, pushing the already strained populace towards open rebellion. And it was amid the Empire's unraveling that a messianic figure would emerge from the chaos. Known only as the Phoenix, this revolutionary leader was said to have been the chosen champion of Okran, wielding the Holy Flame. After rallying the oppressed, he liberated imprisoned humans and ignited a rebellion that would reshape the face of Kenshi as we know it into the modern era. Though historical accuracy is scarce on this and often clouded by centuries of religious dogma, his legacy has endured, giving rise to one of Kenshi's oldest surviving civilizations, the Holy Nation. Now, the exact circumstances of the Second Empire's downfall remain debated to this day. Some records suggest internal betrayals, while others point to the Okranite uprising being the final blow. The most commonly accepted belief is that Catlan's enthralling of his own subjects marked the final nail in the coffin for the Second Empire. Whatever the truth, the Empire fractured beyond recovery. Its leaders, including Catlan himself, would retreat into the inhospitable Ashlands, where they remain currently to this day in self-imposed exile. The rest of their domain would crumble, though the remnants of their infrastructure would persist, eventually forming the foundations for future powers like the United Cities. Now, one of the most puzzling developments of the era that would follow was the sudden appearance of the Hivers, a species entirely absent from historical records predating this period. Whether they evolved from mutated human stock, arrived from a distant land beyond the sea, or were the product of some forgotten experimentation remains unknown. What is certain is that by this time they had established themselves as a permanent presence on Kenshi, forming their own distinct societies with unique hive-based structures. Their origin, however, remains one of Kenshi's greatest contested mysteries, even now. Evidence suggests the Shek, though likely present during the reign of the Second Empire, bore little resemblance to their modern form. The skeletons of the Black Desert City indicate that they once appeared far more humanoid, lacking the distinctive horns that are now defined in their physiology. Referred to in dialogue as enforcers, they may have once served as a specialized warrior caste within the empires of old, tasked with suppressing dissent and battling external threats. Yet, with much of the history lost or deliberately erased, the true nature of their ancient role remains speculative. For centuries, the Shek existed as scattered warring tribes, until the rise of Krull, a warrior whose name still echoes through Shek oral traditions. Through sheer force of will and martial prowess, he would unite the fractured clans under a single banner, instilling them with a rigid code of honor and strength. His conquest forged a formidable kingdom, one that struck fear into the hearts of neighboring civilizations. Yet, like with so many great leaders, Krull met his end in battle. Legends claim he felled an army that outnumbered him 100-fold, a death so glorious that it became the ultimate aspiration of his followers. In the centuries since, the Shek have venerated him as a near-divine figure, their culture revolving around the pursuit of a worthy death in combat. This ethos has sustained their relentless raiding and warfare, ensuring that Krull's legacy endures in blood and steel. Now, amidst the power vacuum left by the Second Empire's collapse, new factions and independent cities would rise to dominance, utilizing the infrastructure left behind by the Empire. After an unknown amount of time, the United Cities, alongside the Traders Guild, would emerge as the successors to whatever fractured states remained. Officially, they would position themselves as liberators, abolishing the arbitrary tyranny of the past, replacing it with a system where only criminals were condemned to forced labor in mines and plantations. Yet, as history has repeatedly shown, such ideals often corrode under the weight of greed and corruption. The definition of criminal grew increasingly elastic, ensnaring not just actual lawbreakers but political dissidents, debtors, or anyone deemed inconvenient. In this way, the United Cities and Traders Guilds perpetuated a subtler but no less oppressive form of control, proving that even in a new era, the sins of the past are never truly buried. This period was an age of transformation, where new powers would rise from the ruins of the old empire and species would emerge or evolve to claim their place in Kenshi's brutal tapestry. Yet for all of the changes that would occur, one constant would remain: the cyclical nature of power, where every revolution would sow the seeds of its own downfall. The echoes of this era still reverberate across the wasteland today, shaping the conflicts of the present and the struggles yet to come. In accordance with Holy Nation tradition, the 62nd Phoenix was taken from his birth parents as an infant and raised in seclusion under strict tutelage of the High Priests. Isolated from outside influence, he was indoctrinated into the Okarite dogma and groomed for absolute rule. Historical accounts describe him as one of the most fervently expansionist Phoenix in the nation's history, a ruler whose devotion to Okran goes well beyond just fanaticism. At age 16, he would preside over the trial of his own birth family, condemning them to execution by holy fire for alleged heresy. This act cemented his reputation as an uncompromising enforcer of divine law, and setting the tone for his reign, one marked by ruthless orthodoxy and an unyielding campaign against all perceived threats to the Holy Nation's supremacy. Decades ago, the United Cities would face a near collapse when a devastating drought would ravage the southern plains, triggering widespread famine. Desperate cities began to rely on the Traders Guild for supplies, but Shek raiders and bandit warlords began intercepting caravans, leaving the populace to starve. What little food reached the markets was often hoarded by the nobles, sparking mass unrest. The ensuing Red Rebellion saw peasants and disenfranchised citizens rise up in revolt, slaughtering aristocrats and even claiming the life of Emperor Anzai. Though the rebellion was ultimately crushed, its aftermath ushered in an even darker era. The noble circle appointed Emperor Tengu, a man notorious for his capricious cruelty and detachment from governance. Under his rule, poverty itself became a crime. Thousands were arrested and enslaved under the pretense of maintaining imperial stability, deepening the suffering of the lower classes. Eventually, the once fertile breadbasket of trade and agriculture, the region of Bast, became a battleground when the Holy Nation launched a sudden and brutal invasion. Farms and towns were razed, civilians slaughtered, and children dragged to rebirth for purification. The exact catalyst for this offense remains unclear, with some believing that Tengu's oppressive policies provoked Okranite wrath, while others believe that the United City elites had begun encroaching on Holy Nation territory. Regardless, Bast has since devolved into a permanent war zone, with neither side able to secure a decisive victory, leaving the land ultimately scorched and lifeless. The Shek Kingdom under King Shagger had been bled dry by endless war against the Holy Nation and United Cities. True to Shek tradition, Shagger saw a glorious last stand, demanding his warriors throw themselves into annihilation for honor's sake. But Bayan, a warrior of uncommon pragmatism, challenged his fatalism, arguing for survival over senseless sacrifice. When Shagger moved to silence him, Asada the Stone Golem, one of the legendary 5 Invincibles, would intervene. Their duel ended Shagger's rule, and Asada seized power, forging a new path for the Shack, halting the war with the Holy Nation in the United Cities, opening trade, and the dismantling of old Shack traditions. Though some warriors still resent this shift, Asada remains steadfast, preserving her people's future, even at the cost of their past. And with that, we have reached the time of Kenshi I. This past century was defined by tyranny, rebellion, and radical change, where empires have begun to fracture and even the most unyielding cultures have been forced to adapt. Yet beneath all of this chaos, a pattern emerges. Power continues to corrupt, resistance continues to rise, and survival will always demand sacrifice. As Kenshi's factions vie for dominance in the modern day, one truth will always remain. The wasteland favors only those willing to rewrite their own destiny.